President Trump is pushing hard against universities using the leverage of federal funding to force changes. He accused Columbia University of anti-Semitism and said he was going to cancel $400 million in grants. 60 other schools are also being investigated for anti-Semitism in the wake of last year's Gaza protests. In addition, the administration suspended $175 million in grants to the University of Pennsylvania because 3 years ago the school allowed a transgender swimmer to compete in women's swim meets. The government has cards to play because schools are so dependent, Tara, on federal money. Is the administration justified in using that leverage to get changes that it seeks?
No, absolutely not. First of all, and we've talked about this on this show before, let's just deal with the anti-Semitism. Part of the problem with anti-Semitism and this attack on students who are protesting what's going on in Gaza, et cetera, is no one has really defined what is anti-Semitism, and increasingly it seems to be that anti-Semitism is defined as any opposition to Israeli policy in Gaza or to the United States support for Israeli policy. So, and that's very, very broad, and it certainly flies in the face of freedom of speech. So that's one issue. Then there's the whole fact that you're also taking in students, in some cases arresting students, who are protesting without any proof that they are violent in any way. That goes to freedom of assembly. So the president is using basically what is this current administration's interest and using that to go after schools for any sort of freedom of speech, any sort of freedom of assembly. In some cases, freedom of the press if students have written an op-ed somewhere. And that's not what our democracy is supposed to be about. If you take the case of the transgender student, you know, until that is completely decided by the courts, and that's what our court system is for, why is this administration so focused on something that, again, seems to be a very personal interest for the members of this administration?
So I think what you're suggesting is that maybe the interest of the administration using anti-Semitism as the reason, but perhaps that's not really what it's about. Michael?
I remember in a speech in September when the president was on the campaign trail, the president promised specifically exactly that he would do these exact things if elected, and here we are.
Well, that's why a lot of people like him. He does what he says.
Right, exactly. Punishing universities, you know, student deportations, the revoking of visas is only shocking for some because now the rhetoric is matching the reality. And I think that's shocking for a lot of people, that the rhetoric is now matching the reality. And it's shocking, but not totally surprising. Perhaps there needs to be a new funding model for how universities get money. I'm not sure, but I do know that when I would go through the Midwest, I would see bumper stickers that said, America, love it or leave it. And I think that to see the government putting that into action is extremely concerning for me, this new notion about America, love it or leave it, and the idea that all forms of dissent are bad. That's troubling for any democracy, particularly a place that has for a long time exported the idea of democracy. So the question now becomes to people in Western Europe, is America, you know, a democracy or is it hypocrisy? It's just not clear to me anymore.
I wonder, Sarah, if this idea of, if this is really about dissent or whether there's a bigger issue about control.
I think absolutely. I mean, this is part of their larger attack on universities, and this has been a long-term project of some on the right, which they think of universities and other institutions like the media as these kind of bastions of sort of left liberal thought, and they end up, you know, very resentful of them and would like to weaken these institutions. There are also places where the empirical reality and truth still matters, and for an authoritarian regime, that's a real problem. And so, you know, this larger attack on higher ed is really concerning. I mean, and it's an incredible act of self-sabotage on the part of this country. I mean, higher education is just this huge engine of innovation that is the envy of the world. Our higher education is the envy of the world, but we're distrusted at home. And I think that distrust is largely a result of this campaign on the right to create universities and, as an enemy rather. And we see it in public opinion polls in the last 10 years. The public impression of higher education has gone down precipitously. And I think higher education institutions have to band together and try to change that narrative and make the case for why they're so important.
Now, the Gaza protests and anti-Semitism are being used for the reason for all this. And there clearly was an anti-Semitic aspect to some of those protests. And so why shouldn't the government take action to stamp that out?
Well, I think you have to keep it in proper context, but I want to go back to Sarah's point. The university has been one of the vehicles that could help a person change their social and economic status in America. That's been the driving force of the possibility of the university system. And the idea of being in the life of the mind, to be on the trading floor of the marketplace of ideas, to examine the larger questions of the human story, should always be emphasized. No matter what your job is in the world, you have to walk in the world. No matter what your vocation may be, no matter what your job may be, you have to walk in the world, and to stamp or tamp down the idea that the life of the mind is important is anti-democratic any way you look at it.
So that's one of the things that I know we all try to do in the classroom, right, is to expose people to new ideas and information, and there's value in that.
Absolutely.